How do you go and outperform on Walmart with a 30 PE? Explain why Walmart has a PE like a luxury goods purveyor.
And Walmart's been executing flawlessly for several quarters, even maybe the past couple of years. And the business mix shift and the gross margin visibility. I mean, there's never been a time in the 20 years I've covered Walmart where I've been this bullish on the long-term outlook. Clearly today, it's interesting. It's a little bit about positioning. You guys talked in your remarks about valuation. That's a factor. If you really dig underneath the covers here, it's really less about the top line, and I think less about the back half of October commentary that the CFO recently made. I think it's more about the margin flow through. That was disappointing. The U.S. margins were disappointing. So when you have a stock at an all-time high at very rich valuations, and you get a little bit of a disconnect, you get this negative reaction. I think the stock will come back throughout the day and over the next couple of weeks, but today could be difficult for the stock.
Can they compete with Amazon, or dare I've never said this before, Chuck Grom, but can they beat Amazon?
I don't know if they can beat Amazon, but they can definitely compete. And I think the physical assets of their 4,000 plus stores in the country really provide them with being really close to, and being able to connect with their customers. So Walmart Plus, there's a lot of opportunity there. So can they beat? Probably not, but can they compete? 100%.
Chuck, you said that margin's disappointed, and that's really interesting at a time where people are wondering when are consumers going to start pushing back on price increases. Is this an indication that Walmart is seeing that time is now, and that in order for them to compete, they've got to take a hit on the margins?
Well, I think almost uniformly, consumers are pushing back on price, and that's why prices are coming down almost across the board. And we cover Home Depot, we cover TJ, we cover Target, Macy's, Walmart. They're all talking about prices starting to flatten out and retreat. I think the U.S. margins were softer because of the GLP influence on the margins because of the drug. It's a lower margin product. It was a higher sales here in the quarter. And when you have discretionary sales be softer, those are higher margin categories for Walmart. So it's really a mixed factor. It looks like obviously the call's at 8 o'clock and the callbacks are later in the day, so we'll get more clarity later in the day. But looking at what it looks like now, I think it's more of a mixed factor.
We were talking earlier about what's good news or bad news for the broader economy when Walmart does badly or well in terms of which consumers are shopping there. Is there any read-through based on the earnings that we've gotten from retailers about whether we're seeing a division between haves and have-nots, about whether we are seeing any broader trends in terms of how the consumer is evolving, which areas are going to be bright spots and which won't?
That's a great question. I think it's really too early to tell. I mean, you look at Walmart's numbers; they're up, comp up 5. Target yesterday down 5. You look at Macy's down 6 or 7 here. It looks pretty uniform. I think there's pressures across the board. It's not really like the high end doing well. You guys talked about Burberry earlier. We'll get more color from Nordstrom next week. I think it's pretty uniform across the board. And we've been talking about our consumer surveys being weak, traffic being weak. Today's numbers and the reactions here over the past 48 hours have really nothing to do with the top line. The top line and the sales are pretty much in line with where people thought. It's positioning, and it's the margin flow-throughs for certain companies.
What's the future of Nordstrom's? The family dynamic and also the attempt to be luxury. I guess what as an amateur I'd say is accessible luxury. Is Nordstrom a sleeper for 5 years out?
I think it's a great concept. I think the rack has really been their Achilles heel over the past several years. So if they could get the rack fixed, I think the fact that they don't have a huge presence of full line stores across the country is actually a tremendous asset vis-a-vis Kohl's or Macy's, which have got hundreds of stores. So I think it's a viable concept. They need to get the rack fixed, and that's what people and investors have been waiting for.
Chuck, what's the rack?
It's our off-price division.
And what do you mean by fixed? What's wrong with it?
When you look at TJ and Ross comping up, low to mid single digits, and you see the rack comping down, it's been broken. I mean, their business hasn't been good. It seems like there's been some cannibalization across the store base. We're not exactly sure. There's been some merchandise issues. They've tried to price up when the consumer wanted to be priced down. But yeah, the Nordstrom's viable for sure. But the rack division, their off-price division, I'm sorry for not clarifying earlier, is really the...
No, it's okay. No, I know. I'm just for people who are trying to follow. Have you noticed, Chuck, that the off-rack, the rack, is actually close to the Nordstrom stores? Have you noticed that? Which is kind of odd.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you my wife will tend to go to the rack now a lot more than the full line. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking about. The cannibalization factor of that is probably maybe the issue here. And maybe they need to close more rack stores. But, ironically, they're trying to grow more right now. So we're hold rated. We're kind of perplexed on some of the strategies there for the time being.